Medical directors and department chairs routinely navigate the complexities of clinical governance, where the evaluation of physician appointments is a standard administrative function. This process changes when investigations verify misconduct by a high-performing clinician. Executives often default to familiar tools, mandatory mediation, probation, or temporary contract extensions. But these assume the risk is isolated, overlooking how a substantiated report alters the institution's legal obligations. Treating a verified violation of clinical standards as a manageable interpersonal dispute allows a localized problem to transform into a systemic threat to organizational governance. This administrative hesitation stems from the non-renewal paradox, the psychological friction medical executives experience when they must act against a professional peer. Many executives view the decision to end a clinical appointment as an optional, aggressive act of punishment. This framing triggers a fear of departmental instability or retaliatory litigation, leading leadership to favor retention over separation. In the context of modern healthcare governance, non-renewal is a structural mechanism of protection rather than an act of retribution. Once misconduct is verified, the decision to separate becomes a fiduciary requirement for managing institutional risk. Healthcare systems are built on high-density professional interactions, where individual behaviors impact the stability of the entire clinical environment. A substantiated report shifts the institution's status from a neutral employer to a liable entity responsible for a verified safety threat. This shift removes the matter from the realm of private personnel management and places it directly into the ledger of institutional liability. External observers and regulatory bodies judge the organization not by the clinician's initial actions, but by the executive response to the evidence. If the threat is not isolated, the risk travels along escalation vectors, specific pathways where internal misconduct breaches the organization's containment. Failure to recognize this transition from conflict to risk ensures that the organization will be outpaced by the speed of the escalation. The risk escalation architecture maps the stages of this breach. It begins at Phase 1, the departmental level. At this stage, internal investigations conclude with formal findings and administrative actions on the clinician's permanent record. Retaining an offender after logging these findings creates a documented history of the institution knowingly maintaining a hazardous environment. In Phase 2, the issue moves beyond the hospital walls, as the case enters a disciplinary review within a national professional society. This makes the hospital's internal governance failure visible to peer institutions and national credentialing boards. Phase 3 is the final stage of escalation, where the issue compromises organizational governance and broad public trust. This level of exposure typically attracts media attention and triggers audits by state and federal regulatory bodies. At this inflection point, the original act of misconduct is secondary to the institutional failure to execute a non-renewal. To maintain institutional safety, leadership must adopt a stance of protective posturing. This matrix shows that non-renewal functions as a defensive maneuver for the organization. This posture is supported by 4 protective pillars that define non-renewal as a structural necessity. The first pillar is the protection of staff safety. This includes a fiduciary obligation to shield trainees and junior faculty from substantiated abusers. Prioritizing a senior clinician's career over the safety of the workforce contradicts the ethical requirements of medical leadership. The second pillar focuses on preserving clinical integrity and the cohesion of medical teams. Toxic environments correlate with poor clinical communication and increased risk to patient outcomes. Removing a toxic node through non-renewal restores the baseline safety required for clinical teams to operate effectively. The final 2 pillars move from the clinical floor to high-level administrative liability. The third pillar is the maintenance of institutional credibility and legal compliance. Regulators evaluate a hospital's governance by its willingness to enforce bylaws uniformly, regardless of a clinician's status or revenue generation. The fourth pillar is the execution of the zero-tolerance mandate. Zero tolerance relies on mechanical execution to remain valid. The mandate only gains structural weight when leadership applies the specific consequences outlined in the bylaws. The mechanism of non-renewal provides the only tangible proof that the organization's conduct standards are operational. These 4 pillars demonstrate that non-renewal is a defensive, compliance-driven requirement that is separate from the concept of punishment. Leaders often fall into the trap of believing that delaying a decision is a neutral course of action. In reality, any hesitation to act on substantiated findings resets the baseline of acceptable professional behavior within the institution. When staff see a verified offender retained in their position, they conclude that the organization's stated values are non-functional. By failing to execute a non-renewal, the medical director assumes responsibility for all future incidents involving that individual. In healthcare governance, administrative inaction serves as a silent endorsement of the behavior, making non-renewal the only firewall against systemic decay. Stripped of its legal and administrative layers, healthcare leadership is governed by a single equation. Trust, combined with accountability, results in safety. The bedrock axiom of the profession is that patients and professionals must be safe, without compromise. Leadership is not a function of title or the ability to avoid conflict. It is defined by the capacity to make difficult, high-stakes decisions regarding credentialing and appointments. When faced with substantiated misconduct, non-renewal is the only responsible path for an institution and its leadership.